Hi, folks, and welcome back to Green Planet, Blue Planet podcast, featuring distinctly qualified global change makers that are dedicated to creating a healthier planet. My name is Julian Guderlei. I am committed to a world that allows people from all walks of life to thrive. Today's episode is part of the Design Science Studio series, a collaboration with the Buckminster Fuller Institute. And my guest is Ganga Devi Braun. Welcome, Ganga.
Thank you, Julian.
Yeah, Ganga is a regenerative counselor and systems change consultant who is devoted to integrity throughout the movements for regenerative culture. With a focus on cultivating collective wisdom, her work weaves together the threads of our internal, interactional, and institutional realities with an aim to move toward a truly regenerative, pluralistic culture which harmonizes with all of life. I'm excited for our conversation, and I'm excited for what is birthing out of this design science studio that we've both been part of for the last 6 months.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's been amazing just reflecting on the fact that it has been 5-6 months in this journey, and there's so many incredible people who I've met through the Design Science Studio, so many amazing collaborations that have happened, and so many creations that have come forward from me that it's astonishing that it's only been this amount of time.
Yeah, so let's backtrack a little bit and maybe tell us how you connected to the idea to being part of the modern design science decade. We have Richard Buckminster Fuller, who started this as a response to building livingry rather than weaponry, right? And so now in the 2020s, a few people came together and invited into this. How did you hear of it and say, I want to be part of that? This is for me.
Yeah, well, so I can kind of track my participation in the Design Science Studio actually through a series of synchronicities that go all the way back to when I was 14 years old and first heard of Buckminster Fuller.
Oh, wow.
When I was 14 years old, I was actually at a gathering in upstate Massachusetts with my father and the spiritual community that he has been a part of since the 70s, that I was born into, the community of Ram Dass and Neem Karoli Baba, the devotees of Neem Karoli Baba, who and it was this beautiful gathering, and I was with my godmother Mirabai Bush, who is an incredible woman, and her son was working on a project that had to do with Buckminster Fuller, and I was hearing his name, and his name just stuck out to me so starkly, and I remember having the thought, if I ever have a bunny rabbit, I want to name it Buckminster Fuller. I just, as a child, as a young adult, I just remember thinking, that's what I want. that was somehow the mnemonic way that name stuck in my mind. And it wasn't until the years later, in the spring of 2017, that I met the person who was the partner on that project that everybody was talking about at that time. And that person was David McConville, who at the time was the chairman of the Buckminster Fuller Institute. And we met at this really incredible gathering that I was very honored to be invited to. And we just really, really connected, and a deep friendship was born from that moment. So that was the beginning of my relationship with the Buckminster Fuller Institute. And it was so spontaneous. It was beautiful because I found in that moment, in that friendship emerging, that so many things that had come onto my plate and into my field of vision and conception of what is possible for humanity, what is possible for the solutions for this world, that it was really came from my own regenerative awakening that had happened about 2 years previously. David and I would just name and talk about those things that I was like, this thing needs to happen, and we need to correct our food systems, and we need to sequester carbon in our oceans through algae, all these things. And David was like, yeah, that's happening here, and that's happening here, and the Buckminster Fuller Institute is supporting that happening here, and all of these amazing projects were unfolding all over the world. And I was astonished, and I was so relieved to know that what I was longing for to happen in the world, that I felt like maybe I had to do all on my own somehow, that I was actually going to be in collaboration with others. So it was a natural thing when the Buckminster Fuller Institute launched the Design Science Studio. I had already been involved for a couple of years with them. I had taught an ecology section in their Trim Tab Base Camp, and it was just a natural step for me to join this cohort, just from a place of deep curiosity and excitement to create with others and to really actually be in that co-creation of the regenerative culture that we're all longing for, and actually be in a container where we can support one another's visions and where we can know what's actually happening in that field so that we can harmonize with one another, rather than just kind of operating in a more, it was much more like clunky. It was much more, I feel like everyone was always trying to collaborate before we came together in Design Science Studio, but we didn't really know how. And I think we're still figuring it out, but we're really on a good path forward to figuring out how to collaborate with one another well through what we're doing in DSS.
Yeah, I love your passion and that story behind how you kind of found your way to Buckminster Fuller. And, it actually sparks a memory that, that name was totally starkly standing out at some point in my life. And then I realized that this unique individual and everyone that came into my life through Buckminster Fuller's kind of connectivity and synchronicity, those were all the people that believed that there is a quote unquote better world possible. And I think that is a very comforting feeling, as in terms of like allowing for creativity, allowing for wisdom or for healing to come through, because, it comes from this connection with this kind of tribe where okay, well, first of all, I don't have to challenge all of my beliefs around a world that can possibly work for everyone. Now, on that pathway there, we have to learn how to collaborate, right? And we have to learn how to actually be inclusive to all of life, which I don't think any of us has figured out quite yet. But it comes back to this commitment and this commitment phase we're in. And there's a quote on your website, Ganga, about, you being committed to cultivating the collective wisdom capacity of humanity. And so I think it's really obvious that we are in times of really great change, but that commitment to me seems pivotal to anything creative we want to birth. Can you dive in a little bit deeper how this is such a clarity for you, that you're just like no matter what, this is your commitment with life?
Yeah. I think that I feel that there's two words that are actually kind of at play with what you're speaking to, which is commitment and devotion, being kind of two sides of the same coin in my language. And I feel like I couldn't speak to my commitment without also bringing in my devotion. So I just want to start with that. And yeah, I've had a strange life. I've had a very unusual life. And one of the facets of my life is that I was raised with a really rich spirituality that was always about collective liberation. And when I was in college, I took vows with a Tibetan Buddhist teacher that my mother is a very committed student to, and that I was studying with at the time and continue to. His name is Dzigar Kongtrul Rinpoche. He's a Nyingma Tibetan Buddhist Vajrayana teacher. And
you went really fast over that name.
Oh,
Can you say
I
that one more time?
Yes, his name is Dzigar Kongtrul Rinpoche. And his organization is Mangala Shri Bhuti, if anyone is ever interested. He doesn't advertise very much. He doesn't cast a very wide net. He's not interested in having many, many students, but people who are really committed
will find him.
Will find him. Yeah. So
got it. Thanks for saying that a second time. Yeah.
Yes, wonderful. And he has an annual, or actually I think it's twice a year now, gathering that's on the modern day Bodhisattva. And he talks about applying the ideas of the Bodhisattva, which is somebody within the Mahayana Buddhist tradition who is committed to pursuing their own enlightenment, not for their own sake, but for the benefit of all beings. And the way that I operate and the way that I see the world is that all of phenomena is profoundly interdependent. It is profoundly interconnected. And I think that whether you come to that realization through studying a spiritual or tradition, spiritual, religious, or philosophical tradition, or just by studying cause and effect all around you, just by observing the nonlinear causal nature of reality, I think that anybody who's listening to this, anyone who's interested in regeneration, has a sense of the interdependence of all life. But this is something that's really, really emphasized in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. And yeah, that tradition and that way of understanding the world is really, really rooted in me, in my mind, and my relationship with reality. And so, and for me, I think some people talk about the way of the Bodhisattva as something that's like very selfless and very self-sacrificing almost, and almost cruel to yourself. Why would you return to samsara, to suffering over and over and over again, just for other people? Why would you want that? But my perspective is that the impulse of bodhicitta, the impulse to pursue enlightenment, and by enlightenment I truly mean liberation, and I don't just mean liberation on a spiritual or psychological sense, but in terms of actual liberation on every scale, including political liberation, social liberation, liberation of life on all like ecological spheres, and that the longing to liberate all beings naturally comes from awareness of interdependence. And there, when you are aware of the incredible interdependence of all reality, it's just kind of obvious. It's just obvious that there is no individual liberation without collective liberation. It's just not possible. And so from that, it's just the commitment feels just like, it's just like a natural outflow and natural impulse of my being, that I would be committed to cultivating the conditions for the thriving of all of life. And for me, one of the strategies of that commitment is nurturing collective wisdom. I think there are a lot of really amazing people who are doing amazing work on collective intelligence these days. And I deeply honor and respect that work, but the work of collective wisdom is somewhat different. And I perhaps it's because I was raised with a lot of wisdom traditions, and I'm continue to renew my commitment to those wisdom traditions. But I feel that every single human has tremendous capacity for wisdom. I really do believe that. I believe that every human being has it deeply, deeply rooted within themselves to have the wisdom and to source the wisdom that we all need in order to arrive at a global culture, and less than global, more translocal culture all around the planet.
Planetary, if I can
Yes,
throw that in,
planetary.
right?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Way of being that is truly omni-beneficial. We need everyone's wisdom to come online for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you just shared a whole bunch of things that I, made some mental pins in, and well, at some point probably circle back in our conversations. Funnily enough, Bob Marley comes into my mind. Emancipate yourself from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds. Which I always found such an awakening song, the redemption song, right? To invite people into this idea that we first have to actually free ourselves before we really participate in the creative pursuit or in the pursuit of building something. Otherwise, we'll just continue to build more of the same, more of the linear, more of the known, more of these control structures, and more of, what ultimately doesn't truly allow liberation, I think is the word you used.
Yeah, and just to add on to that quote, today, the day that we are recording this, not the day that this will be released, but the day we're recording this is actually the birthday of Audre Lorde, who's one of the most influential thinkers and writers in my life. And she has an incredible quote that's very much worth bringing up now as well, from the perspective of herself as a leader in the Black feminist movement, in which she said, "I am not free while any woman is unfree, even when her shackles are very different from my own."
Wow, let's let that sink in.
There's so much wisdom in that and applying it beyond feminism, inclusive of feminism, to all pursuits of liberation.
I feel like we just really kind of positively rambled into like the core feeling of this Design Science Studio experience right now. And this is framed by the Buckminster Fuller Institute as the Design Science Decade, right? And in the decade, each 2 years have kind of a different theme in the way it is being anticipated. And the theme of the 2020-2021 year is reconciliation and commitment. And so I asked you about commitment, but really reconciliation comes up because it seems to be on some kind of an interesting polarity to commitment, because we can't really fully commit in true liberation as long as we haven't healed or reconciled this inequality, this steady oppression from the past. And I don't think we've done the best job in the world, or like the job is done in this design science cohort. But I think we're addressing it, and we're actively continuing to invite into it. Now, I don't know if reconciliation or healing are ever done. I don't personally believe it is, but I think it is important to simply create the space for it, because that's when, you know, we can open this question to what are we actually committed to, and what is it that we want to bring into this world. And only when we make really wild commitments, we can actually also humble ourselves to say, wait a second, I don't actually know any of the steps to get there, but I'm wildly committed to it. And so therefore I will figure out, I will apply my knowledge into experience, which then results into wisdom, as you just shared, right? To find a path to get there. And another humbling effect and factor of this, and you already mentioned it as well, is that we can't do this alone. There is no way to figure this out alone. You can get rich alone, and you can reach a certain status alone, and you can, you know, hack the system alone, the system that we know. But to act on the emergence of consciousness to what is truly coming through the human soul in a state of liberation, we have to go together.
Yes, and yeah, I'm actually reminded as you're speaking of a poem from Buckminster Fuller, which is called "And It Came to Pass Not to Stay," and it's actually all about wealth and different ways of looking at and understanding wealth. And the only form of wealth that Buckminster Fuller identifies that we are actually able to grow, that we are actually truly able to grow, true wealth, is know-how. That's how he puts it, is know-how, knowledge. I would also add wisdom to that, or perhaps wisdom isn't something that is grown. Perhaps wisdom is just something that is tapped into. But also, like, knowledge is not something that we can achieve on our own. We have to be learning with others and alongside others, and in the context of community. And something that I learned in Design Science Studio, I forget the exact numbers, but it was about how we actually retain things that we learn in different like pedagogical settings. And the highest level of retention is learning in a peer environment that in which you're learning from your peers, but you're also teaching what you're learning to your peers. And that's actually how I've designed the curriculum of my project within the Design Science Studio, and how I want to pursue everything that I do from here on out. Is I want people to really learn, and if that means learning together, then that's what we should do. And so, like, whether it's learning together or accomplishing things together, seeking to heal the world together, all of these things, it has to be collective. It has to be collective. It won't be effective if it's not.
Yeah, 100%. I love that you brought up the retention of when we're learning with peers. And there is a Stephen Johnson quote that, you know, was kind of featured in one of the many visionary decks that are floating around within our community. And the quote goes about, I think I'm paraphrasing, but our thoughts shape our spaces, and our spaces in return shape our thoughts, or return that favor. And so when I think of that, spaces is something that in my mind is often associated as something very architecturally or something very physical. But really, in this day and age that we are in, where we're, you know, through maybe some kind of, from some angle, unlucky circumstances, we're synchronistically connecting more digitally with a whole group of people that we possibly could have never met in physical space before. And also the sheer mathematical or statistical kind of overlap of who is meeting whom now, based on that a lot of things are digital, create space. They create a digital space. They create a space when it's facilitated well, we could even say it's ontologically designed. It's designed for a state of being first, so that we can be peers with each other around kinship and belief systems into this world with livingry rather than weaponry. And then from there, the magic starts turning, even if there's no tactile outcome, or even if there's no instant understanding of what's the next step.
I think often because there's no tactical outcome being strived for, or like a specific next step that is preconceived, the beauty of multiple living systems coming together is that it spontaneously gives rise to emergent properties, new living systems that emerge that are different than what could have been imagined or planned or contrived by the systems at play individually. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Very well said. There's a whole bunch of questions that are coming up for me, and I'm just kind of pondering where to take it, because one of the themes in this design science cohort number 1, and obviously everyone who's listening, if this is intriguing to you, make sure you apply for one of the future cohorts. I don't know, Ganga, if this goes for you as well, but I can say for sure that this, for me, has already turned into a commitment of a full decade. I don't know in which shape or form I'm going to be involved in every year, but it's such a clear personal commitment in my life, and has been before. And now, having found another kind of fragment of my tribe, it's like, I can't wait to play for longer than these 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
But the theme that's coming up a lot is this of the necessity or the need for a different kind of dictionary, or new words, neologisms that allow for just meanings that are kind of formerly almost, invisible, to make those visible. What are some of those words that maybe you've captured, or some of the thoughts you have around that?
Well, I mean, since joining the design science decade, or okay, cool.
Or before, if you have anything that's like really fitting into that context. Yeah.
Well, I mean, for me, I think it's useful to share when just the word regeneration became a really significant piece of my lexicon. Totally. So for me, I didn't know that there was like regenerative movement stuff happening, and it was very, very early in what I would consider like the regenerative emergence that is unfolding everywhere. We have words for this now, we'll get to in a moment. But I was in a relationship with I was studying a lot of social sciences and religious anthropology and Tibetan language translation, things like that in college. And my partner at the time was an environmental studies major, and we were both very, very interested in both culture and ecology. And we were both I had begun to be involved in some restorative justice work. I have a mentor who is an incredible figure in the restorative justice space, and I was learning a lot from her. And my partner at the time also was studying restoration ecology, and we were feeling like really frustrated with the language of restoration in these contexts, both social and ecological, and also frustrated with the language of sustainability. We were just like, it is such a toothless term. It doesn't mean anything. And I mean, that's a bold statement, but we were just frustrated with it. And so we started this thought experiment that was, what if we exchanged every instance of the word sustainable, but also the word restorative, just in our own minds? If we just changed it to regenerative, what would that turn out to be? What would that give rise to? And that was really like, it felt like it unlocked a lot of things in my brain. It really changed my brain to do that. And so I just want to mention that if anyone's listening that is intrigued by that as a thought experiment, please take that on. Please just see what happens and what the word regeneration turns out to mean to you when you practice that, and explore different definitions and different ideas around regeneration. Like, truly allow yourself to come into a state of confident trust in your own understanding of regeneration over time. That's just something I want to
throw one in there, Ganga.
Yeah, please.
So in another word that I've learned in the design science cohort, I'm going to double tap on this because meaning I'm hearting or liking it, because that's the same thing that happened to me. Actually, I was majorly frustrated with the whitewashing about the word sustainability and what it really means, and how easy it was for companies and syndicates to get around it. And at some point, the word regeneration and regenerative came up for me and in my consciousness. And suddenly I was playing with all of these layers of what it actually includes, from the soil and how we address agriculture, and how we relate to as humans between multiple generations of our own lineages, or how we think of ourselves as ancestors of the future. And many, many more things could come up. But just to mention a few, it was really a game-changing kind of way to look, or way to perceive how I am doing what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it changes everything. I feel that I can track, meeting David McConville and becoming all of the amazing synchronicities that have unfolded in my life in the last 4 or 5 years. I genuinely attribute them to that simple shift. I feel that was a choice that I made that changed the trajectory of my entire life, to just commit to curiosity around these terms.
Well, this is kind of cool that it comes up in the way it's coming up in this episode, because really the regenaissance, right?
Mm-hmm.
This kind of another neologism that we've created, and that's really kind of taken a hold. And it's also, I've definitely like dedicated the podcast to be one of those vehicles for it. Is basically this idea of what we were just talking about, regeneration, as a word that symbolizes times of change
Mm-hmm.
into circular thinking and living, right?
Mm-hmm.
Circular meaning circular economy, but also meaning the cycle of life, and the cycle of life between generations, and the cycle of the soil, and the cycle of the waters, and all of these cycles that are really inherent in nature's intelligence, meeting the Renaissance, right? The time of, yeah, I mean, a classical golden era in that sense of creative outburst after, I think, the Italian Renaissance happened after the bubonic plague ended. So like,
Mm-hmm.
kind of like a parallel to where we're at in our society right now. Great devastation, possibly even devastation of death, sickness. People had to rethink what they're doing. And on the other side of that is a birthing of opportunity, because
Mm-hmm.
really great chaos
Yeah.
is kind of the starting place of opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And I when I think about it, I like to think about different renaissances throughout time, not just the Renaissance that emerged out of Italy, in which is like the Renaissance that we refer to, but also, in Tibet, there was actually a Renaissance in the 11th century, where many new schools of Tibetan Buddhism were born, because there was new information and new texts that were being brought from India, all the way across the Himalayas into Tibet. And of course, there's a different name, there's a Tibetan name for what happened there. But I think about that, and as a significant influencer in my understanding of what does Renaissance mean, and what does the Regenaissance mean as well. And this like infusion of new ways of approaching understanding reality, and also looking at what was, you looking at more deeply into the past, which is what the Tibetan Renaissance in the 11th century, as well as the European Renaissance was. It was actually very much in conversation with the past, and that's something that is, I think, an element of regeneration on a cultural level that I would actually like to see us talk about a lot more, because regeneration isn't about just going into the future, like just going into new perpetual growth. It's not about perpetual growth at all. It's actually very much, if you look at regeneration on an ecological, agricultural level, it's all about composting well. It's all about taking what has gone before, and what is no longer what no longer has the function that it perhaps once did have, and finding and allowing it to naturally decompose in place, to be able to give rise to new life, new meaning, evolving species, evolving culture, evolving all of these things, new life coming out of the natural and appropriate decomposition of the past. And so, when I think about regeneration
So
in a
well said.
cultural
Yeah.
way, yeah, I think about, well, okay, what from the past needs to decompose? And right now we're seeing the collapse of so many systems that were never created for equity to begin with, that were never created for an omni-beneficial future and world to begin with. That was never the case for a lot of the systems that are crumbling now, but they did serve some functions. And so my question is always, what were those purposes? And how can we take what is dying? How can we take what is decomposing? How can we take what is passing away from the old world and honor that which is sacred, or that which serves from that, and really make sure that we're actually metabolizing and actually deconstructing the things that really have no place in the future, and allowing that to create the fertile soil for the future. And there's like metaphysical ways of understanding that, but there's also incredibly practical ways of understanding that as well.
Yeah, that's the beauty about these processes in the context of regeneration, or the context of just, the patterns of life, really, is that they can be very esoteric, but really, truly, and only if they're also very pragmatic, they're truly connected to life, because life is so pragmatic, but life is also so multidimensional. And so I think, this came up in a few of the Science Studio series interviews already, that this reductionist era of science as the only sense-making tool is kind of at a very interesting, maybe composting point right now with the global pandemic, and the way our health organizations are taking care of it. Because once again, I think there's probably more possible, to say the very least, and not to get lost in this rabbit hole. But yeah, Ganga, I have a personal question for you that I'd love to bring up at this point. And a lot of the things that we're talking about, and a lot of the things that are the themes and topics when we venture into this kind of world, and again, to bring up Buckminster Fuller's words, like utopia or oblivion, right? Are we living in a world that is dying, in a world that is centered around death, or are we actually able to kind of pivot into birthing not just a paradigm, not just a belief system or a dogma, but like systems and relationships, interconnectedness, as you called it before, that allow all of life to thrive. And so in that kind of a choice, what I've come across in every community I'm in every project, with every client I've been in a relationship with, is the topic of trust. And so I'm curious, I've actually asked this question over 260 people at this point. At some point, I'm going to write a book about it, because I think trust is such an interesting kind of thermostat of our human relationships. What is required for you to experience trust?
So what is required for me to experience trust is nothing external to me. It's only it's an inside job. For me, my capacity to trust others can only exist to the extent that I'm able to trust myself. And I have done a lot of work to trust myself. It's not something that has been natural or automatic to me. I think we live in a world that really cultivates a sense of either just disconnection from self, disconnection from our capacity to trust, or an actual distrust of ourselves, of our bodies, of our body intelligence, of our intuition, of our capacity to think and process and metabolize anything around us, of our distrust of our capacity to deal with trauma, all of these things. I've had tremendous distrust of myself. And when I was a child, like, I lied all the time. I was not a trustworthy person when I was a child. I don't know why, but I just had this impulse to just like hide the truth all the time. And so for me, I've really taken my own shadow work really seriously. And I've really sought to be a trustworthy person to the people who I love. I've sought to be truly trustworthy. And that's really what motivates my shadow work. Like, I wouldn't do it if it was just for me, but I do it because I want to have really good relationships with the people that I love and that I want to collaborate with and that I want to build life with and I want to be in existence with. And from that commitment, from that longing, from that devotion to those relationships, to my own trustworthiness, I have found that I know whether or not I can trust people because my body tells me. I know whether or not to what degree I can trust an environment because my body tells me if it's trustworthy or not. My intuition tells me. I'm also a student of human design, and so I've really gotten to know my own design in that context. And I'm a pure generator with sacral authority, so I know what it feels like in my body when my intuition is coming online. And
yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah, and that has been like the best thing ever. And that it's like it's like not even my business if another person is trustworthy or not. It's my business to respond appropriately to what I understand is going on in the environment that I'm a part of. And sometimes that means removing myself from that environment. Sometimes it means speaking up in instances that are sometimes very uncomfortable. Sometimes it means just modeling the kind of behavior that I think that I would like to see in the space. There's like a lot of different ways that response can come, but it has to begin with a sense of self-trust and self-knowledge.
Yeah, thank you for that deep answer. I love it. I have another one of those. And this is maybe a little random, but we kind of went through almost like a schooling program there with the Design Science Studio. So
Yeah.
if you alone or with any group of chosen experts could change the education system as we know it, what would you do?
So this is actually really fun because it definitely ties into the question about trust as well. In the Design Science Studio, we had a number of sessions with Tony Patrick on world building. And one of the tasks that we had was to, in these like small breakout things, we were tasked to kind of imagine the 30 years from now, the cultural norms that that enable something that we want to see happen in the future. And the task that my dear friend Harris and I had was moving at the speed of trust. That was like the long-term goal that we had as our task. And so we backcasted what would need to happen like every year for within this decade to allow a culture, to enable a culture that is able to move at the speed of trust. And what we devised was actually an end result a decade from now in our educational system that, and not just in our educational system, but certainly centered there, but a culture of forest bathing, actually, in the style that a friend of mine, Julia Plevin, who wrote The Healing Magic of Forest Bathing,
Who's been on Green Planet, Blue Planet
Oh,
podcast.
wonderful. I just talked to her earlier today. She's wonderful.
Nice.
She's developed this beautiful framework and approach for forest bathing that really creates a sense of trust among the people who participate together. There's aspects that are very solitary and that are very collective. And it's a practice that really regulates the nervous system and allows you to be, you're in a trusting relationship with your own body, with the people around you, and with the larger ecosystem that you are embedded within. And I really thought of that as like such an amazing, powerful touch point of like, if we could have everyone on the planet regularly having these kinds of experiences in the way that Julia's really developed them and designed them brilliantly, but in unique manifestations between different communities, not as like there's this one thing and we're going to like colonize everyone to do forest bathing in this one singular way, but to enable actually every community to develop their own protocols and their own rituals, and to allow schools to manifest it in ways that are uniquely responsive to the needs and of the students, as well as to the unique ecology and the location of the schooling. Even if it was something that was done, even if the whole school didn't change to be outside schooling, which would be amazing, but even if like nothing else changed, but there were regular experiences of that, whether it was every day, every week, once a month, something like that, I think that would be a profoundly transformative, long-term change for humanity. People would have a sense of ecology. People would have a sense of what it means to be in silence with others and in deep relationship with trees and with yourself and with somebody that you've only just now encountered in this new way because you're in this unique experience of the world. That is, I think, the one change that I would like to see happen.
Yeah, that's a deep one, right? When we are educating and learning with nature as a primary teacher, things just change. I mean, we understand our own nature, we understand each other's nature, we see the interconnectedness from an early age. I'm absolutely 100% with you. For today's episode, and it feels like I'm cutting us short because there's so much incredible energy in you that is able to articulate like very few people are able to articulate, and I'm really appreciative about what we shared already in this episode. But for today I have one more question, and this is about a multi-generational perspective. So when we
Yes.
talked about regeneration, we mentioned it a little earlier, that this kind of generational thinking starts to happen, and it's also inherent in the indigenous way of seeing the world. And so if you were to zoom out with me for 7 generations right now, and just for a few seconds here, just ponder what's deeply in your soul or in your heart as a dream or as a prayer for humanity or for our planet, if you see yourself as an ancestor of the future.
So I feel like there are like tactical ways to answer that question, but that's not how I want to answer the question. What I actually feel called to share is a vision that I had about 4 years ago that was just like a snippet, but it's the strongest thing that comes forward when I hear your question. Can I share that? It won't take too long.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Okay, cool. So I don't know. Maybe this is 7 generations in the future. Maybe this is my great granddaughter's eyes that I'm seeing through, or perhaps a future incarnation of myself. I've always had a sense of that. But there's a vision that I had on the night that I actually met the person who's now my husband, which was New Year's Eve going into 2017. And in the vision, I'm standing on a threshold between my home that I'm walking out of and the space surrounding my home. I'm walking out of my front door. And my home behind me is simple and has everything I could need. And there are people that I love there. And the space that I'm walking into also has people that I love and has other homes that are similar to the home that I just walked out of. But there's also common spaces. There's an outdoor kitchen, and there are gardens where children are playing. And there's this huge canopy of trees growing above us. And in the understory of the tree, of all of the trees, we are maintaining beautiful food forests in a way that is really responsible to our bioregion. That sense was very, very clear in this vision, in this one moment that I had a glimpse of. And I could see and sense the presence of the homes of the people that I most want to be in village life with all around. And I could feel the presence of everything that we needed to have that life. And I didn't see any cars. I didn't see any big machines. If there was, machines and technology, they were deeply integrated into every piece of our life. There was nothing that felt contrived or inorganic in this space. And I just felt this intense sense of peace and this intense awareness, this incredible knowing that the peace that I was feeling and the ease of the life of everyone all around me, that this was happening everywhere on the planet in ways that were unique and appropriate and emergent from the intelligence of the land, from the unique ecosystem of each place on the planet, but that everyone had access to this kind of way of living. And I knew in that moment that I had done everything possible to get us there and to contribute to that. And knowing deeply that I was not the only person, but that there were many of us, but that I, through my devotion, through my commitment, had done everything that I could possibly do to bring humanity and to bring this planet into that state of being. And I can't have the hubris to know what would be most appropriate in South Asia. I can't have the hubris to know what would be most appropriate on the Russian steppes. I don't know what's appropriate in different places, but I know that I contributed to the emergence of the wisdom of the places all around the world through supporting people in giving rise to their wisdom. And that's the only answer I have. I don't know how far off, I don't know whatever, but that is the timeline that I am navigating toward. That is like the attractor state that I am always bearing in mind with every choice that I make.
Thank you so much for sharing that vision that you had a few years ago and take us to that moment. It deeply resonates in listening. And, I had spy really briefly to understand the definition of hubris. And so I don't have the hubris, now I use the same word, to know the right answer to this question, because there is no right answer to this question. But I'm part of my devotional commitment is to continue to, I don't want to say extract because it sounds like a wrong
Not
word,
extract.
but to inspire these stories.
Yeah, to nurture the space. I mean, you, in what you're doing with the podcast, you are cultivating the space through asking questions, which is, I think, you know, Daniel Christian Wall, like, he really emphasizes, like, questions are the thing. Like, and my project with Design Science Studio is literally me asking the question, what questions need to be asked in order to give rise naturally to regenerative cultures all around the world in a high integrity way. That's literally what drives me. And the fact that you have then approached this inquiry by creating an environment in which you just ask questions, I think is brilliant, Julian. I love it.
Well, thank you. There was a lot of brilliance that you shared in this episode, and thank you for acknowledging literally the core reason of why I started this pursuit. Anyone who's been listening for a while, I highly recommend you do this in your own life in whatever form that it takes for you. It does not have to be a podcast, but following inquiry deeper and deeper and deeper into relationships, into connection points, is something marvelous happens. And you know, I find myself sometimes too in sharing and thinking that I know, and then I reflect back and I'm like, did I ask a question? And I can answer that with a confident yes, then there's a bit of ease, because when we ask questions, that's when life really happens.
Yeah.
And I think that's why children ask so many questions, because they're new to life and they're just wanting to play how this all works, right? And so Ganga, this was a super entertaining episode. Thank you so much for making the time, for making the space, for being you. And preach, sister. I mean, this is really the message, and it has to be out there more and more. And it's really not a message that is you and I telling people what to do. It's a message that, for you listening, again, this is an invitation. Find the Design Science Studio. This is a decade-long program. Join in whatever form you see fit for yourself, and just be inspired and inspire others.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Julianne. And thank you, everybody who's listening. Like, thank you for your contribution. Thank you for your curiosity. Thank you for being a part of this incredible emergence that is happening all over the planet. We need you. We all need you. Life needs your brilliance. Please step into it. Yeah.